to have been in this space working in the greatest legislative body in the world, to have the position, to have the small platform that I do, to be able to do what I do during session in the California legislature for as long as I've been able to do it is just something I would have never imagined in my wildest imagination, to be honest. And so I'm really fortunate. Every time I walk in the chamber, it's like the first time all over again. Yeah. And just from what we see, from my perspective, what I see, what I'm able to witness on the floor, history being made every single day, every single floor session we show up, to be a part of that process is really just surreal.
All right, hello and welcome again to another episode of Sacktown Talks. Today we're glad to be joined by the voice of the assembly once again, David Bowman. David, thanks for joining us. How's it going?
It's going well. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. And in fact, I meant to tell you this before we came on air. Today marks 1 year from the episode that dropped, as my daughter would say, last year. October 24, 2022. Last year was the first episode that you and I did. So it's a privilege, honor to be back and break bread with you.
Yeah, it's good to have you back.
For sure.
It's interesting to kind of learn about the mechanics of how all this stuff gets done. And, talking to you and, Brian Ebert and some of the other folks on the assembly side is just fascinating, just to see how everything gets going this year. It's interesting. We've had Chris McKaylee on. He always talks about the volume of bills. Oh, yeah. And I think there's like 2,300 bills this year. What was session like for you this year? Kind of what was memorable?
I think session, in a word, for me was busy. I say busy today. Well, this year was the first year post pandemic. I think the governor signed the executive order ending the pandemic February 28th, 2023, beginning of this year. And so it's been the first full year, post pandemic, just busy. I mean, we had, in fact, I want to say it was about 200 more bills introduced this year than last year, the first year or second year of session. So it's just been busy. I mean, the pace of everything going through committee hearings and floor sessions were a bit longer, more committee hearings, just the pace of the building itself seemed to be back to, pre-COVID norms, which were just intense, insane, lots going on, lots of people there, some protesting, lots of advocates coming down. And so, it's been, busy, but a real opportunity for me, especially in my role, to learn and to be prepared for some of those crazier floor session days, for sure.
And just seeing social media, like there was some celebs and notable honorees on the floor this year. Who stands out in your mind about who came to visit the assembly floor this year?
Off the top of my head, I'd have to sit and think about it. We there was again a lot. I go back to what I was saying, just respect to just the year. We had the largest amount of new members on the first day of floor session that we've had in over a decade. I think we had 25 new members sworn in day one, 38, 2013, 14. So the last decade, the most we've had since that time. I mentioned we had 200 more bills introduced, lots going on just in a 2-3 month span where you had a speakership transition, the House of Origin deadline, budget deadline, recess, and then we came back for end of session. So there was a lot going on. So, not to sidebar your question, there were lots of folks that came in. I just was I feel like I was more focused just on the tasks.
It's funny now, just kind of reflecting. I was like, I know I saw like on Twitter, like David posted some photos or someone did. Yeah. Of like you're taking photos with celebrities, but I can't remember exactly what. But I was like,
off the top of
I was
my
like,
head,
man, I remember. I was like, wow, David gets to meet all these cool people.
Well, yeah, I mean, and so when folks come in, celebrities, sports figures, they come in,
political
right?
Celebrities,
we have opportunities to interact and sit and talk with them. The Golden State Warriors championship trophies were there earlier in the year. As a basketball fan, lifelong, that was a pretty cool moment for me to be able to see the Larry O'Brien trophies up close and personal. Was pretty cool for me. But I'm not, and most people don't believe this. I don't get starstruck, so to speak. I see folks, and I always just try to, maintain my same level of cool, composed demeanor. I will say, however, when Speaker Rivas, when he got sworn in, Speaker Pelosi was there. I hadn't had an opportunity to meet her, got a chance to meet her, and that was a cool
Yeah.
experience. But I'm not really, and then I'm so locked into my job during session that it's hard to kind of get into or really even focus on who's there. It's really
Right.
just kind of me getting to a place mentally where I can do my job to the best of my ability because the moment you get sort of caught up in who's there, you miss something. And if I miss something, everyone's looking at me like, hey, you don't know what you're doing. So less focus on who's here,
Right.
more focus on your job, the job itself. So
It's kind of funny. We were talking before, like you've been, doing this, you've been in the building, what, for 15 years
15
now.
years, yeah.
And it's kind of like, you look back on like a lot of these members who probably started,
Right.
15 years ago, like
Yeah,
probably like a
yeah.
guy like Alex Padilla,
Sure.
some guy that you
Yeah.
worked with.
Right,
And,
yeah.
now he's in the US Senate.
Right.
Kind of, reflecting on that, kind of like what members do you remember working with kind of 15 years ago? And now, they're big players on
Oh man,
the
yeah,
world political stage.
yeah, I've had so many incredible moments during the course of my 15-year tenure in the building. Alex Padilla again was one of them. Yeah, it's hard to really pinpoint because there were again are so many that have sort of come and gone. Lots of members that are in Congress right now. I've had the privilege of serving with Sidney Camlogger Dove, obviously Kevin Mullen, who's a
Yeah.
legend in his own right. Worked with him for a number of years. Norma Torres, I worked with the first couple years I was here. And I'm just thinking of names off the top of my head, but it's always cool when you can sit back and just sort of reflect on, again, not just the members you work with, but the time that has passed. I told you before we came on, the only other thing I've done 15 years is be a parent.
Right.
So to, have the opportunity to have been in this space working in the greatest legislative body in the world, to have the position, to have the small platform that I do, to be able to do what I do during session, in the California legislature for as long as I've been able to do it is just something I would have never imagined in my wildest imagination, to be honest. So I'm really, really fortunate. And every day, I have members ask all the time, does it ever get old? And the answer is always the same. It doesn't get old. Every time I walk in the chamber, it's like the first time all over again.
Yeah.
And just from what we see, from my perspective, what I see, what I'm able to witness on the floor, history being made every single day, every single floor session we show up. To be a part of that process is really just surreal. To be a part of an institution that represents so much to so many. I told Russell before we came on, you have a state where there's 40 million people, and the California State Capitol represents probably 40 million different things for those 40 million people in the state. And to be a part of that institution, to be a part of the process, to be a part of democracy, to be a part of just this incredible, legislative body is something I just do not take for granted at all. And I'm just really fortunate, really fortunate.
And it's kind of interesting too because you're kind of like a neutral, right? You're just kind of like a referee. Just you're there,
yeah.
just kind of watching it all unfold. And I guess there was some kind of historical, interesting stuff that happened this year that hasn't happened in a while. You had a speakership change.
Yeah.
You had a couple, procedural, moves. Trying to move bills out of committee and stuff like that on some public safety things. Kind of, what was it like that? Kind of, what do you remember? And kind of, what can you tell us about kind of those experiences? Kind of sitting there on the floor watching it unfold. Kind of like because there's a lot of stuff said that a lot of us can't hear on the mics, right? Because it's just happening, happening right up front.
Yeah, I mean it's always. The journey is always sort of interesting to watch play out on the floor. You see some of the, I call them fights. I call them, respectful disagreements. Or, you have 80 members that represent 500,000 people who all want to see the state of California flourish in every way. They just have different ideas and vehicles, to get to where they want to go politically. But I mean, I don't have Twitter, but we have staffers in our office who have Twitter, and they'll come in and hey, Assembly Member so and so said they may, do this and try to do that, right? So for me, I'm always a student. I'm always listening, wanting to learn, because my job during session, I always have to be on key all of the time. So if I get tipped off that something may happen, whether it does or not, that's always valuable information for me, because then, as I prep for session, I talked last year about preparation and the work that goes into that. I'm able to sort of gear up if and when something happens, again, that may or may not happen. We've had several motions made, different things that happened during the course of this past year that hadn't happened in 25, 30 years.
Right.
And that's, the name of the game, so to speak. You have to be prepared for any and everything. There's no room for error. There's no room to guess. When I'm prepping for the end of session or for a floor session, I'm going over 50 different scenarios that may or may not happen, right? If a member stands up and makes this motion, what if this member objects? And if they object, what's the process at that point? What's the vote requirement to, for this motion to pass? Or, so you have all of these different scenarios, again, that you're trying to play out in your head. You're trying to practice for, prepare for. And sometimes you can practice and prepare all you want. You go out to floor session and everything that you've tried to prepare for,
everyone's
something
prepared to get punched in the face.
But and then to another point, there have been some major, and I think that's just the nature again of the building. And just this past year, the theme has just been really, really big, busy, major policies that have been passed. Whether you talk about AB1. It now allows legislative staff to unionize by 2026, right? AB 1228 raises the minimum wage for fast food workers, I think, to $20 an hour, right? AB 27, which I believe addresses, or AB 33, I'm sorry, seeks to address the fentanyl crisis. AB, was it 421? Mr. Bryan, which, sort of reforms our referendum process. I mean, you had these major policy decisions that were being made during the course of this year. So floor sessions were a bit more intense. Committee hearings were longer. You really saw legislation being vetted, I think, in a way that's beneficial to all Californians, and I think it does the institution a good service. And so again, when a bill makes it to the floor, at that point, we're standing back and just watching it play out. And as you know, our job is nonpartisan, so we don't get caught up in the political battles, so to speak. Our job is to really represent and make sure the institution is functioning and running, at a level that's fair to all members. The integrity of the process is protected at all times. The presiding officer has the information they need to be able to do their job effectively. The majority leader has information he needs to be able to do his job to the best of his ability. So all of these things are sort of how we function in the office of the chief clerk. And it's never, which I'm thankful for. I am a tax-paying citizen. I am a voter, but I'm thankful that I can separate my politics from my job when I step up and do, what I do.
Right. I was going to ask you, a lot of people, you go through so many bills, right? And like a member voting, they're like, you always ask a member, like, do you read all these bills you vote on? I was going to ask you, do you actually read these bills that you're going to? And it's like, that's actually your job, right?
Yeah. Well, so my job is to, more or less read the titles of the bill, but I'm always a student. So I read the policies, not because I have to. I'm just always sort of a nerd when it comes to learning, and I tell staffers and all the time, it's like, there's nothing that says you can't learn and understand the policy. And for me, in our office, we deal more with the procedural aspect of the legislative process. So, the rules and making sure decorum is followed and so on and so forth. But, I love reading about legislation that's going to impact me, my family, my community. But with respect to my job during session, it's usually just the title. So it's, AB 25 by Assemblymember, Jared, an act relating to the funding for Sacktown Talks for 2024.
Brazilian style, we just go first name.
Right.
Have we ever had a member do that? Just go by a first name, just one name?
Not to my knowledge, but I'm sure I could probably get that information. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like, no, usually it's...
now they hear this, one of them's going to do it.
Right.
Like,
Right.
That's fine. So, you're the reading clerk, but, in your title, it's what, principal clerk too?
Correct. Yeah.
What duties do you have outside kind of, reading and preparing for floor session?
Yeah. So floor session, I always, when I explain what I do, it's always sort of twofold. One is obviously what you just mentioned. During floor session, my job as the reading clerk is to, reading is always the fun part of the job. And I mentioned this to staffers and members alike. Reading is always the easy part. It's understanding, having a detailed knowledge of the legislative process, knowing the vote requirements for every single piece of legislation, every single motion that's being made. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, knowing and sort of anticipating what happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way I learned the legislative process through one of my mentors was ask yourself the question: if a member objects to anything that's happening on the floor, what is the process at that point? And so floor session, in that role as a reading clerk, there's always anticipation. There's so much that I sort of go through in order to gear up for end of session or House of Origin or for budget deadline. I mentioned last year there's lots and lots and lots of reviewing old videos and looking at old floor sessions, not to look and admire myself,
right.
but always to look at things I can do better, always look at ways that I can become better. You always want to be a student in what you do, anything in life, right? And so when you're a student, you're always in this mind frame to be open to information, to learning more about your craft. And so watching old session tapes, looking at old journals, looking at my rule book at least an hour a week, reading my Constitution for multiple hours during the week sometimes, especially during end of session deadlines, allows me to be able to perform, hopefully at the highest level possible, right? It's never about me. It's about working and serving the institution, serving the members, and doing and representing what I hope is the best of myself, when I step up and do my job. And then outside of a floor session, we have various research projects that we work on. We have three main publications in our office: the Journal, the Daily File, and the Weekly History. And so, working to make sure those publications are being put out, again, on a daily basis, the File, the Journal, on a weekly basis if you're the History. We after session adjourns, there's usually a period of reconciling where we're looking at every vote that's been taken that floor session, making sure that it's recorded accurately and in the way the member voted or wanted to vote during session. You get, for me, I also have the privilege to speak to a lot of the groups that come in the Capitol. Members will contact and reach out. Hey, can you talk to this group of college students about the legislative process, or about, what your job is, or maybe give them an example of what you do during, floor session. So there's, all sorts of different things that we sort of work on outside of the floor session, but that's kind of, the bread and butter for me. When we gavel in, I always tell folks it's really analogous to sports. I played basketball my whole life, and I still get nervous. I don't play as much anymore, but when I do, I still get nervous until you tip the ball up and it's go time, right? And it's the same thing for me, floor session wise. I'm still get nervous, even though I've been in that role for a while. I've been in the Capitol 15 years, but been in the role of reading clerk for the past 6 or 7 years. I was the backup for a couple of years and then became full-time in that role 2020. And I still get nervous. So
2020 was the first year you became wow.
Well, first year
primary
reading clerk. Yeah, I was the backup from 2017 until 2020. Katie Lewis, the former reading clerk before myself, she left the legislature that year, and I was fortunate, like I said, to have the opportunity to serve in that role. But like I said, it's the moment we gavel in, the assembly is in session. The moment I hear those words, it's almost like I turn into a different person. Let's go. I'm ready to go. I'm prepared. I've done my homework. I'm going to make sure that while I'm in this role, no one's ever going to question my work ethic, my preparation. No one's ever going to question whether or not I know how to do my job, because I trust the work that I put in. Sometimes the hours of work that I put in to again, try to the best of my ability to be, I think I said this last year, to be the best, reading clerk this state has ever seen. Never, ever, ever to diminish anything that anyone that served in that role has ever done. But I am, a perfectionist when it comes to my work product. And that's the one thing that you have in this term limited era of, politics, not just with members, but with staff as well, staff turnover rather. You always want your work ethic to speak for itself. And you want folks to know when they see you and when you leave this building, which at some point I will, what's my legacy if there's such a thing? And I always want folks to see me as someone that always showed up, that always took pride in my work, and someone that's truly believed in giving back to the institution. And really, I think for me, it's the opportunity that I have to work in this incredible institution is reflective in my, my work ethic and my work product for that matter. And so that's something I stand really, really strong on. It's something I believe wholeheartedly in, and something I hope propels me to the next phase of my career, whatever that, that looks like in this role or anything else. So, yeah.
So like half the Capitol is like torn down now.
Oh yeah.
What's it like working in a active construction zone?
Oh man, that's
what kind of like is the chambers getting spruced up? Are you guys getting some new tech?
Yeah, so we're getting some new tech for sure. To answer your first question, it's almost like white noise at this point, and I say that because there is just construction banging all.
Were you in there when like the tractors were like just tearing the whole thing down?
Yeah. In fact, I have a video on my phone of the last piece of the annex, being torn down on the building. It's surreal, right? I've been in that, in the building 15 years. You've worked in there a number of years. And so to be able to see from one end of the building to another end of a building when you look outside of a hole is just, weird in itself. And I think for the first time since before the annex went up between 1949 and 1952, there was sunlight actually coming in. I think the contractors had, they were moving some stuff and there was some sunlight that came in. And so members took notice of it. And I think a staffer sort of noticed and looked and said, "Hey, when's the last time there's been sunlight coming into the building?" But yeah, it's been pretty chaotic and crazy to say the very least. But in terms of the technology, we're going to be getting some new voting boards. I talked to Sohrab Mansourian's a good friend of mine. He came in yesterday and he's like, yeah, he's excited about the technology that's being put in. I jokingly, and I say jokingly, asked him yesterday, I said, hey, so is there an opportunity for us to maybe flip on a game, during a late night session, right? He's like, well, no, we can't do that. But I'm excited to see, what's next from a technological standpoint, coming up. Because I think the current system that we have was put in around 99, 2000.
Wow.
So we're 23, 24 years, getting some upgraded technology. So, it's like anytime you buy something new, you're always excited to kind of see.
So is that like the bill tracking, all that stuff is like 20?
No, so this is more
just like your sound.
Yeah. So this is more when you watch session, the display board that's behind me. And then when members vote, the two display boards on the floor, those three boards are going to be getting replaced, and updated. Yeah. A lot of the programs and systems that we have in place that allow us to do bill tracking, bill introductions and so forth. A lot of that technology has been modernized in the last, 2-3 years, right? COVID really presented a great opportunity for us to really kind of upgrade, some of the systems that we have, the processes that we have in place. And so, this is strictly specific to display board and the two voting boards, which, we're going to be 4K. So we're going to be able to
really see those names sharp.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's something. So, as you said, you had 24 new members. Yeah. You got to read off the roll call every day or every week. Yeah. Kind of what names presented some challenges to you, if any?
Oh man. Let me see off the top of my head, this session, I should have brought over a sheet with me. When I think about this stuff on the fly, I can never think about it. And the moment I leave, every single name will come to me. We have, Bill Asaley, that was one of them. Uh,
Do you have to distinguish between the Pattersons when you're doing the roll call?
Oh, yeah. So Joe Patterson, Jim Patterson. Yeah, anytime we have two members with the same last name.
And the same first initial.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's 24 new members, and with that, it's really helping the members to, get acclimated to their new roles, right? Helping them to, in consultation with the Capitol Institute, who provides, the training for members, the Speaker's office, who's heavily involved in that, the Chief Clerk's office, who, really just trying to help them understand what to expect on the first day of floor session. It's chaotic, it's crazy, it's busy, everyone's excited, your families are here, everyone wants to take pictures, but really helping them to be able to do their jobs again on day one when they get sworn in, because on day one there are several resolutions that members will vote on. So it's helping them understand when you come in, here's where you put your key, here's where you vote, and then from things like helping them. I wouldn't say helping them, but really sort of being a resource, right? If those questions come up, where are the committee rooms? Where's the chamber? Where's the members' lounge? Right? It's almost like
where's the bathroom? Yeah.
Right? It's like first day of school, right? And so our job.
Are there bathrooms on the floor just for members?
No. So the nearest bathrooms are right outside the chamber, right across from the members' lounge. But again, it's that's where when you have an influx of new members. It becomes busy, right? There are various training sessions for members, and it's fun, but again, it's also very much, I wouldn't say a madhouse, but for lack of a better word, a madhouse.
Right. A lot of talk about the speakership change this year. Kind of what was that like for you? And is your job any different today under Rivas as it was a year ago?
No, excuse me. No, it's I wouldn't say different. Obviously the speakership transition took place this year. Speaker Rivas was sworn in June 30th of this year. And, again, we don't get involved in the politics. Sure, we read the news, just like I mentioned earlier, everyone else. We see the headlines. But our job is always neutral, and we are going to support the institution regardless of who is in the office of the speaker. What I will say is I was fortunate to work with Speaker Emeritus Rendon 7 years, someone I have just an incredible amount of respect for, a gentleman of the institution, and he gives the tightest bear hugs I've ever had in my life. No joke.
You're very huggable.
Oh, yeah. Right.
It's surprising he can get his arms around.
Yeah, no, it's but I was very fortunate to work and serve with him for the 7 years that he was speaker. Again, someone I have so much respect for. I think the institution will be better for generations under his leadership during his time. And then Speaker Rivas, someone who's a really good friend of mine, someone who I think is really going to take us to that next level, as far as where we need to go and be as a legislative body. But both men I have the utmost respect and admiration for. And coincidentally, both men, in the time that I've known both of them, we've never had a conversation about politics. It's always about family. It's always about how's your daughter doing. It's always about, Speaker Rendon, every time I see him, how's your mother doing? It's always about the things that really matter the most outside of politics. And so I can say both, both Speaker Emeritus Rendon and Speaker Rivas are two, of the kindest people, most professional men I've ever worked with and worked for. And so I obviously working under Speaker Rivas now, I'm looking forward and excited to what's next. But also at the same time acknowledging the contributions that Speaker Emeritus Rendon, gave to the legislature and navigating through a pandemic and all sorts of other different things. But yes, like I said, it's the transition. I know sometimes in the news, there are different buzzwords, the battle and all that. We don't get caught up in all of that. It's the transition. What was busy about it was, I think I mentioned this earlier, was again, you had, House of Origin, which was the end of May. You had budget, which was, constitutional deadline was June 15th. And then you had the speakership transition, June 30th.
Which was a big deal, right? As you said, Nancy Pelosi. I remember there was tons of kind of marquee folks coming in.
What's so cool about those moments for me is I I have to sort of stay locked into the moment, right? And so a lot of times, staffers or members, they'll think I'm this super serious guy. I think I mentioned this the last time I was here, and I'm really not. I just have to sort of focus
Mhm.
because, hey, David, we need you to read X, Y, and Z, right? And everyone that's anyone
Are you like the
is
MC for these things too?
MC. I mean, I still serve in my
Yeah.
official capacity as reading clerk. There may be a certificate of election that needs to be read.
Mhm.
I'm still calling. That was an actual floor session, so we're still going through the role. There may be, and this is where again, you just never know. There may be, something that needs to be read aloud. Excuse me, with the members, and I may not find out until 5 minutes before a floor session. So if you look at the tape of Speaker Rivas being sworn in, the governor's there, Speaker Pelosi's there, all the constitutional officers are there,
Mhm.
essentially every former speaker's there. So everyone that's anyone's there. And I'm just standing in my space and I'm looking down at the floor, really just trying to lock into the moment, right? With so many people in the chamber, I then have to project, a little bit louder,
Mhm.
or at least, for me, I have a pretty loud, booming voice. But when everyone's there, you also want to be, you want to project, you want to sort of, hone into to that role, and so nerve wracking to say the very least. But at the end of the day, like I said, I'm always gonna show up and you know do my job.
Right.
The first day of session, though, this past election cycle, December, the Constitution says the first Monday of December we organize our house. That was cool and nerve wracking at the same time because initially I thought I was going to have to read a proclamation from the governor. The governor was going to convene a special session, which he does by proclamation. And I would have had to read the governor's, which to me, I sort of viewed it as reading the governor's words aloud in front of the body. The
Mhm.
governor was there. So imagine being in a situation where I'm about to read the governor's words with him standing literally behind my shoulder. So it was a bit nerve wracking. I didn't have to end up reading it, thankfully. It was something else that a different route they ended up taking. But I did have to, in order for members to be sworn in, the process this past year was, I read the member's name and the various counties they represent, which you got to go
Oh my
from 1
God.
through 80, right?
Yeah.
Certain members represent multiple counties. I
Some of
think
'em
Megan Dally represents 9
wow.
counties, right?
Some of them aren't easy to pronounce too,
No, they're
right?
not at all, right?
Yeah.
So those are just, again, some of the, I never say challenges, some of the things that you have to just sort of be ready for if and
Right.
when the opportunity presents itself, for you to do your job because you never
Yeah.
know. And then even during session, not to sort of pivot, but during session, Isaac Bryan, Majority Leader, who's a good friend of mine, someone I have so much respect for, he may come up, mid-session, hey, Bowman, get your vocals ready. They may have 200 amendments that they
Yeah.
want to, what's called batch. So
Right.
we're going to have you read the item number, bill number, and the author number. And again, sometimes that stuff just happens on the fly, right? So no
There
time
you
to
go.
rehearse, no
Right.
time to prep for it. You just have to be
Right.
ready, to go.
It was funny.
Right?
I just met someone who does TV and they
Nice.
lost their voice and
Oh
they
wow.
lost it for 2 or 3 weeks. You ever
Wow.
experienced anything like that?
That is a good question. I have had moments where, I mean, as you can see now, I have a slight cough. I'm still trying to get over. There have been moments where I've lost my voice, or again, I have a cough. Maybe I'm getting over a cold or something like that.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter. You still got to go up and perform. Now, prior to this past year, I didn't have a backup. A buddy of mine, Russell Tomas, who's a staffer in our office, he was the unofficial backup. But last year, a good friend, staffer in our office, Taylor Martin, now serves as my backup, and she's come in and just totally rocks the house when she gets up
Mhm.
there and does her thing. So if in the event something happens, I
Right.
lose my voice or I win the lottery, right?
I think if you win the lottery, you're still doing this now.
right. But if something like that happens,
Yeah.
there are measures that we can, sort of take to where the job is still being done. And again, it's as simple as me shooting, Taylor an email, text, hey, I'm going to be out tomorrow, or, I can't go, you were able to get up. And, for her, it's a lot more difficult because I always sort of liken it to, backup quarterback, right? You never know when that opportunity is going to present itself for you to get up and kind of so you always have to be in this space of being ready, right? And I served again as the backup for 3-4 years. And there'd be times where during session, maybe the reading clerk at that time needed to, take a break or something happened where they didn't come in that day. Well, hey, Bowman, you're up, and you got to be ready to go. And that's, again, going back, not to belabor the point, but that's where that preparation really, really comes in, right? How serious are you, with respect to being ready and prepared for, floor session, given the opportunity you have, right? I mean, how much work are you putting in when the cameras are off and when no one's looking versus when the cameras are on, everyone can see you, right? Mm-hmm. And so I've really tried to take the approach of just always, there's this old saying, growing up, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready, right? So that's something I try to apply in my life even now.
Yeah. So you were talking about the speakership change. Kind of one, I guess, notable change, right? Is like you hadn't said Rendon's name in like 7 years, right?
That is
he goes by he goes by Mr. Speaker, right? And so was that an adjustment for you?
It was, yeah. That's a good question. What's so funny is that Taylor, the backup reading clerk, and I were having that discussion, and you're so trained to sort of memorize the role and the way
and you guys say it so fast, right? Yeah.
Right, yeah. So I kid you not, true story. The first day that it went back to Rendon, I mean I'm nervously, just going through the role. And the conversations that you're having with yourself, people don't know this. They think, oh, you're just reading and it's going smooth. There are probably a million different conversations I'm having in my own head, right? As I'm reading just the role. And that's the easy part. It's the easiest part of floor session. So as I go from top to bottom in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, did I say that? Did I say that name? No, you didn't say that name. Oh, well, if you didn't say it, you got to keep on. These are all the things I'm saying to myself. So I finally get to Rendon and I say it, and there's just this sort of weird cringe I have within myself. I'm like, this just doesn't seem right. I don't, and then you're like, oh my God, Rendon, and I forget where Assemblymember Luz Rivas' name is. It's close, but she still wanted to keep the Luz Rivas, right? So the distinction that was easy for me when Speaker Rivas was just Assemblymember Rivas was Luz Rivas, Robert Rivas. Right. Now it's Rendon, Luz Rivas. And then there's this sort of mental adjustment that you're making, on the fly. And I would say it probably took a good, maybe 3-4 sessions before I was actually comfortable, with, Rendon, Luz Rivas, Rodriguez, so on and so forth, right? And even when you have, let's say a vacancy or, a new member, special election, someone new is elected, those are always things that you train your brain to see what it sees, and anything that's different from that is always going to sort of throw you off.
Yeah,
but that's a good question. That's
So, you, like in your job, you spend a lot of time sometimes just waiting.
Oh yeah.
You'll read the roll call,
right,
and then you'll just wait for them to start.
Right.
What is the longest you just had to sit there in the chambers?
Oh man, listen. So when I first started in the Capitol. The very beginning of 2009. So that process is really what we're doing is waiting to establish a quorum, right? We can't transact any business. We can't take up any bills. We can't do anything until we've established a quorum.
And how many members is a quorum?
Quorum is half plus one. So when the Assembly's 41.
41, okay.
And the Senate's 21. So when I started in the Capitol, it would take us a good hour and a half, at least hour to establish a quorum during that time.
2009.
No
so
joke.
I guess it's different for every speaker, right? Because some speakers like, you better be here.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? The clock starts or something like that, right?
Yeah. So, during that time, I can't speak to why it took that long, and I won't speculate. I'll just say it. I mean, if you look at old Cal Channel DVDs from 2008, 2009, 2010, I mean, it was literally us, gaveling in, the reading clerk at that time, calling the roll, and us just sitting around sort of waiting.
Oh, is it like, well, you got Monday session and Thursday session?
Right. Yeah. So when I started, it was Monday session was actually at 12 noon, not 1 p.m. Thursday session was still at 9, I want to say. Occasionally it'd be maybe 8:30. More often than not, it was 9. But yeah, you're sitting there for an hour and a half waiting until we establish. And I guess what's interesting about those times is, let's say it's the beginning of the year and floor session's only going to last for 5-10 minutes. We're going to take up one resolution, do 2 adjourned memories, and then adjourn. So you're waiting for an hour and a half to establish a quorum. We establish a quorum. We're in session for 10 minutes, and you adjourn. I would say when Speaker John Perez, when he became Speaker, I think he became Speaker March 1, 2010, if I'm not mistaken. He was very much so, I mean, let's get here, let's get in, get it done. He was very, very, very great about, getting, members to the floor. And again, we don't interact with members in that respect to, get them to the floor. Our job is to make sure the operational side of things is working. But I'd say, Speaker Perez, when he became Speaker, we'd have a quorum in 5 minutes. And that was, the norm. And so now, I mean, it's just really depends. Sometimes leadership, maybe there are negotiations with respect to maybe legislation that they may or may not want to take up, or maybe something else is going to happen, something big is going to happen. Someone's going to make a motion to do whatever, right? And they're strategizing those conversations, again, I'm not necessarily a part of. It's just speculation.
Yeah, you're just on hold.
Yeah, I mean, we're just sitting. So you'll see me, on camera, just kind of, I would say twiddling my thumbs, but take a sip of my coffee and just really, but, for me in those moments, I'm really sort of taking in just the moments. I had this sort of interesting experience, actually, I think it was the last night of session this year, so September 14th this year. And it was while we were waiting to establish a quorum, but also when we were, the members were debating a bill. And I sort of looked down in the center aisle, and I imagined, going back to 1875, 1900, 1925. I said to myself, you know what? Someone was standing here in this exact role during that time, right? And you're just, it's these weird sort of moments where I really, really appreciate, just being a part of the institution and recognizing that this place has been here for, over 160 years. And will be here for another 160 years, so on and so forth. So to be a part of this place, to be the reading clerk for the state of California, in this role, sort of imagining what life was like for the reading clerk again in the 1800s and the early 1900s. It's this sort of surreal feeling that
I just remember people smoking on the floor.
Oh yeah, that used to be a thing for sure.
And now you couldn't even fathom that.
Oh no, God, no.
And then remember a couple years ago, people were smoking cigars on the balcony, and I don't even know if that happened.
No, oh yeah, no. I mean, no smoking in the chamber, at all. That was absolutely a thing. Some years back, but yeah, no, they run a pretty tight ship now. Members will occasionally step out on what it's called the portico to get a breath of fresh air, or maybe have a cup of coffee, take a phone call, because you can't even have cell phones. You can have cell phones on the floor, but you can't physically talk on the phone on the floor. So yeah, it's a pretty again pretty tight ship when we are in session. And again, a lot of times, going back to what I said, I really just take in a lot of what I see. You will occasionally see me just sort of looking up, and I'm not staring into what my mother used to call La La Land. It's I speak to lots of the students and groups that come in, and the way I sort of put in perspective, just how important the legislature and the Capitol is. You go back to 1869, every law that's passed in this state, every law that's on the books, going back to 1869, was debated on the floor of the state assembly and the state senate, right? The hundreds of thousands of statutes that we have to live and abide by was debated on that floor. And I say 1869, I may have mentioned this last year, the Capitol obviously wasn't always in Sacramento. San Jose, Vallejo, Benicia, Sacramento, San Francisco, and then permanently residing in Sacramento, the first time the legislature met in the chamber was 1869. So that I'm looking around and I'm just sort of taking in, the beauty, the history, the rich history that is the California legislature and the California Assembly. And I never, ever take it for granted. It's not something, and that's why I mentioned earlier, it's like it's never something that becomes old for me. It's always like the first time, every time, because for me it is. I'm a kid from South Sacramento who never in a million years thought that I would be one, holding the position that I do, but two, working in this place being the California Capitol. And so to be there, to have the opportunity to be in a position to where you're able to work and showcase your skills and abilities. I mean, it's a true honor for me.
Yeah.
It's a true honor.
So you've been there for 15 years. Kind of we talked about like there was like some contentious policy stuff, but like behavior on the floor is like much improved in the last 15 years. Like, were you around when like Warren Furtani like got like a fist fight? Like
I was.
15 years ago?
I tell that story often. Actually, I never say his name, but I always tell that story. I mean, I think.
Did they need you in there to hold him back?
No, I mean, I totally would have. I think, my buddy Isidore Hall, I remember on the video seeing him. I mean, he was, here in a matter of, seconds. Yeah. I think V. Manuel Perez was also someone that kind of stepped in, and the sergeant too, an incredible job. Right. They were there within seconds. But yeah, I think the dynamic then was the House was more closely divided, right? When I started, I want to say the majority party had, 50 seats, and the Republicans, 29, 30 seats. So when you have a House that's more closely divided, right, to me, it sort of creates certain moments where there is that sort of contention, debate, discussion. Yeah. I think even more so in the 90s, right, where you had, if you go back to 95, 96, just in general, that first day of session, you had, I think, the Republicans at 41 seats, Democrats at 39, and that was probably the most.
What is it now?
62, 18, I want to say.
Wow.
Yeah, 61, 19 or 62, 18. So, it's debate. I will say in recent years, that debate this past year, was I wouldn't say more contentious, but you saw a lot more debate, right? You saw, I wouldn't say a significantly more amount of points of order parliamentary inquiries, but I would say if you look at the last 6 years, the past year or 2 years, in my opinion, you probably see an influx of those points of order.
Right. It's kind of funny with like social media, like there was like something in Georgia, right? Where like some members got like silenced or like kicked out or something like that.
Tennessee, yeah.
Tennessee, was it? Tennessee, yeah. And like, I guess you did have some instances here where like some Republican members were complaining because their mics were turned off while they were talking. Yeah. What is the rule on that? Like, can the speaker pro tem at any time just be like, okay, enough, like you're done, or what?
It's a difficult question for me to answer. I'll say, in my time here, you have to be recognized by the presiding officer.
So if you put your mic up,
right,
then they have to recognize you.
Yes. So I think in a democracy, it's always, fair to allow someone to have their voices
heard. In Congress, I think that filibuster thing where you have to like talk constantly, and they can't.
And we don't have right. But
people talking days.
Sure, right. And but those are again decisions and things that happen that we don't have any part of it. And that's for me where it becomes difficult because, you'll see me on camera during some of those more contentious moments. I'm kind of looking to see, how's this being stated? what motion is this member trying to make? Because I have to build it on the board that's right behind me. And I'm doing that.
Type it in.
Yeah, I'm doing that in real time, right? And it's not just building the motion, it's looking at, again, the vote requirement. Because what a lot of folks don't really know is if, let's say, I key in the wrong vote requirement on a motion, not on a bill, because the bills are typically majority. There are examples where there's a 2/3 vote, and there are other examples where 3/4 and 44%. But I won't go into that. But specific to motions, let's say I build a motion to suspend the rules, right? Well, the vote requirement to suspend the assembly rules is 41. If, let's say, I key in the wrong vote threshold, instead of 41, it's a majority of those present and voting, what happens is when a motion or bill reaches the requisite number of votes to pass, there's a green box that lights up. So it's essentially it's red once the speaker or the presiding officer says, "Clerk, open the roll." You hear that ding. As the votes are going up, box is red until you hit that vote threshold. At that point, it turns green. That's an indication to the presiding officer that they can, at whenever they choose to, clerk will close the roll, tally the vote, ayes, right? So for me, when I'm sort of anticipating what's going to happen, I'm looking at my boss. I'm trying to kind of overhear maybe the majority leaders come up to talk to the speaker. Like, I'm trying to eavesdrop on every conversation to do my job, right? And that's the piece of what I do that a lot of folks don't recognize. Again, reading is probably 2%, maybe 5% of the actual job. Everything else is the anticipation, right? Did he or she say they want to invoke the Constitution? Did they say they want to suspend the rules? Did they say they want to, it's all of how certain motions are stated, as to, how my boss has to then advise the presiding officer how I have to build the board and how the business is able to sort of, run.
I guess, like, you kind of talked about, like, you're kind of like the referee, right?
Sure.
So, like, there's rules, right? And you said the Constitution.
Of course.
So, like, if the speaker pro tem, like, wants something and directs you to do something, but the rule says contrary, and the opposing people are saying, no, here's the rule. Who makes the decision?
That decision is made.
Is there an appeals process? Can you send it to New York for review? Like, what?
There isn't so my boss serves as the parliamentarian, and so she will advise the presiding officer accordingly. What the rule is, right? But how maybe the rule's been used in the past, right? What the precedents of certain rules are. But she is the ultimate authority in terms of parliamentary procedure, who advises the speaker, the presiding officer. Everything I do is at the direction of the presiding officer, not at my boss, who again is the chief clerk. The presiding officer says, "Clerk will open the roll." That's when I open the roll. Clerk will close the roll. That's when I close it. What's unique about that is I've had times where members on their bills, they will come up to my podium and they'll say, "Close the roll, close the roll. We have 41. Well, I can't close the roll until the presiding officer instructs me to close the roll. So if I'm ever asked to do something that's not in accordance with the rules, during session, I do essentially what I'm directed to do via, again, presiding officer. I let my boss, Sue Parker, kind of work out the particulars. If there's something that's done or said, I don't even have time to react in those moments to say, well, the rule says X, Y, Z. And again, because of the pace floor session, because of how fast things move, there's never really an opportunity for me to stop and say, unless it's something that, it's just like, okay, well, I'll turn around to my boss, or sometimes to the presiding officer if my boss has stepped away, and just kind of, hey, example of that would be, let's say there's a bill that, the presiding officer wants to take up, or they move to take it up, but there's, per the 72-hour provision, can't be taken up until 5:15, but it's 2:15, right? Speaker pro tem may say, members will now move to item X, Y, and Z. The clerk will read. I'll turn around if my boss hasn't already explained to the speaker pro tem that this bill isn't eligible. I'll turn around and just say, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this bill isn't eligible until X, Y, and Z, right? examples like that, right?
Mhm.
Or, if there's a bill that's 54 votes, it's an urgency clause, stuff like that. But as far as motions, being made, that, if the member's not being called, that's completely out of,
Right.
above my pay grade.
So, I guess, we kinda talked about, like, the new speaker and then,
Mhm.
like, kinda new positions are
Sure.
appointed, right? So you had a
Mhm.
new kinda members to work with
Sure.
on the
Yeah.
mic. Kinda
Right.
what's the adjustment like working for the with the new speaker pro temps?
Yeah, there's always an adjustment, because everyone has different styles, right? I was, I always say fortunate to work with Speaker Pro Tem Kevin Mullen for the first couple of years in that role as reading clerk. But every Speaker Pro Tem, every presiding officer is great in what they do. They just have different styles. So the
Mhm.
adjustment is really sitting down, talking with them. It is, the training sessions that, our office will often coordinate with their offices and with them. It's, asking questions, right? I mean, what's your preference? Again, example would be with Mr. Mullen, I would turn around and say, Mr. Mullen, this is a 54 vote bill, no urge. With Ms. Agria Curry, would you prefer me turning around and saying this? Would you prefer that information being communicated through my boss? What's your preference in terms of
Right.
how you want to be? Because at the end of the day, I mean, the presiding officer is running the show, and our job is to really help them to do their job to the best of their ability. We never want to make them seem as though they don't know what they're doing or anything like that, right? So I'm not going to turn around and yell at the top of my lungs and say, "Hey, you missed this or you did
Right.
that." Our job is to again protect the integrity of not just the process, but really, I mean, floor session and the member presiding. And so, I know my boss has frequent meetings with leadership when there is leadership changes. Our office again is really heavily involved in that. But yeah, just figuring out, and then time. Um, Working together, always
Right.
sort of just, you learn each other as time goes on. It's again analogous to, I always go back to my sports analogies, right? You get a new coach or you get new quarterback. I mean, you have to put in the
Right.
time, um, to learn their habits and to learn how they manage the floor, learn how fast they go, right? It's all in
Yeah.
how much do you want to learn, right? And it's again different because personalities are different. Again, styles are
Mhm.
completely different. Um,
Have you ever seen someone, like, become speaker pro tem and they try it out and they're like, "No, this isn't me. I don't like it. I don't wanna do it anymore.
well,
Too much work."
I can't, speak to the conversations that they may have within themselves.
Yeah.
I've seen uh, individuals get serve in that role, and after a period of time, maybe you don't see them anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a personal decision. Maybe
Right.
that's a leadership decision. Those again, are decisions that we're not, but again, that's creates more of an opportunity for me um, to just be on my toes because you never
Right.
know. I can go into work, we can have session on Monday and Miss Agria Curry is presiding, and Thursday, Stephanie Huynh, who's the assistant speaker pro tem, is presiding, and the following Monday, maybe something happened over the weekend, or where a new assistant speaker pro tem or speaker pro tem was appointed, and you really just have to roll with the punches. I mean, that's really, I wish it were more complex and
Mhm.
complicated to explain, but it's really not. You just have to
Right.
be on your guard at all times, and with anything that you do. Um, it's all contingent on how much time, effort, sacrifice are you willing, ready, and in a position to put yourself in order to be successful and
Right.
effective at what you're doing.
It's kinda interesting, you described kind of like a pretty chaotic scene a
Sure.
couple of minutes ago
Hmm.
about the different motions and
Sure.
things going on.
Hmm.
Kinda what is the most difficult part of your job?
I would say if I had to really sort of explain it, just what I mentioned a few moments ago, just the anticipation of not really knowing what's going to happen at any
Mhm.
given moment, right? I mean, by and large, our sessions are scripted. A lot of what you see, the talking points that go out. I'm sure you know this in your role when you were in the Capitol, right? I mean, so most everything is scripted. Uh, but there is always the possibility that something or someone's going to go off script. And it's just being in a space where you're ready to do your job if and when that happens. Right. I mentioned earlier in this conversation, I don't have the luxury of I think, or I don't have the time to do this, or what's going on. You have to be ready. I mean, there are hundreds of different rules, procedures, and various entities that governs what happens in the Capitol and during the course of a legislative floor session. And my job, my role as the reading clerk is to really know and understand every one of those procedures, right? Because you never know when it's going to happen. We could have a motion again that hasn't been made since 1922. And a member could decide to wake up and say, you know what, I'm going to go in session today and I'm going to make this motion that hasn't been made since 1922. Right. And in that time, in that moment, as I mentioned, I can't, everyone stop. I need to, figure this out. I have to be willing. Right. Right. Yeah. I have to be ready, ready to go. And so when I talk about, again, hours of prep work, I mean, it's an understatement, right? It's looking at all of those things, right? It's asking yourself the questions that may never get asked. It's going over things that may never happen, but you do not have room to, for error. And so, I would say that's probably the most difficult aspect of what I do. And then, sometimes, I mean, my colleagues laugh, when we have longer sessions standing there, right? I mean, I can't just leave and go to the restroom when I can, but trying to, keep yourself engaged and I wouldn't say awake, but, alert.
You're standing the whole time,
right?
Huh?
Standing the entire time.
So hours a day you're on your feet.
Yeah. So it's the mental, like end of session is always, end of session in particular is always like, this is the Super Bowl of politics. I mean, we're going to long days, long nights.
What kind of shoes are you wearing on these days? Huh?
You know what? I still wear my hard bottoms, but occasionally I'll sneak in some soft bottom, casual dress shoes. But for the most part, I'm and I have a pad underneath where I stand. I can sort of alter my posture every now and again. But it does get tough. And that's why I appreciate some of the more intense floor sessions, because when it happens, you're like, oh, wait, oh, wow, something just, I'm awake, I'm alert now, versus, us just taking up 200 bills. Yeah. It's kind of the same thing. I'm always alert regardless, but those more intense floor sessions and when you hear certain policies being debated, you get excited because you're like, all right, this is going to garner some real intense debate, which is going to keep me on my toes. And that's, the anticipation. The anticipation is always there. Right. Yeah. And again, sometimes it is nerve wracking. But for the most part, it's just, it's waiting, kind of seeing what's going to happen. Right.
So, session ended, 30 some days ago. Yeah. It didn't start again until January?
January 4th. Yeah.
So, your voice gets a lot of rest. Have the Kings called you about doing some PA announcing? You doing anything on the side? Some voiceover work?
Yeah. So I did some PA announcing work with the Kings a couple of years ago.
Did you?
I did. Wow. Yeah, Scott. And I've been approached with some opportunities to do some book, some voiceover in books. I was approached by another gentleman to do some voiceover work. He's doing a short animated film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Opportunities come, and I think that's the beauty of the role, right? I always jokingly say to folks, I'm like, I'm the annoying voice you hear if you ever tune into a floor session or you visit the Capitol. But in that role, I've been very, very fortunate to, like I said, have some folks approach me about some different opportunities.
Can you sing too?
I cannot. I can hold a tune. I cannot sing. I cannot sing. No, yeah. I can hold a tune. I'm a drummer. Percussion was always my thing. Yeah, it wasn't singing, but So I got some cool opportunities to do podcasts here or there, and like I said, some interviews and some voiceover work, and which I'm looking forward to. It's my mother would always say, hey, if you have a gift, you got to use it. Right? Yeah. Use it to the best of your ability, and always do good, with it. And so that's what I'm all about, in addition to that, just kind of during this time, not just resting, but also really using this as an opportunity to try and mentor, be a resource for other staff. And I think I've had more coffees in the last 2 weeks than I've had in the previous 5 years combined. Wow. Right. But that's also something that I'm so passionate and something that means a lot to me is being a resource to staffers, new and old. Being someone that they can call, and if they have questions, not just about process, but about how to navigate the building that is the state capitol. Right. I mean, it's a fast moving place. So much happens. And, for me, I would say at this point, even when I reflect on my career at this point, because it's almost like when you get to a certain place, what you appreciate changes in the sense that for me, my happiness, my joy comes from looking and seeing other staffers sort of achieve, their goals of making it into the building, of introducing their first bill, of making it through their first House of Origin deadline, of making it through their first budget deadline, their first end of session deadline, right? It's like looking and seeing the happiness and joy on their faces. For me, I've been around 15 years, right? I've done, a lot, I feel like, but really, really creating, I think, the next generation of leaders in the building, which is, again, something that I feel like, has changed since, the first term limits law was enacted in 1990, Prop 140. You lost a lot of institutional memory. You lost a lot of good longtime staffers. And so Russell and I were talking before we came on. I've met with several, it's funny to say, the senior statesmen in the building, right? 15, 20-year staffers. That's the goal, to try and really bring that era back into the Capitol, right? Where we are resources to staffers that come in. So if you call me, reach out, email, you want to have coffee and pick my brain and get advice or learn again about the process, the legislative process, how things work, what I do during session, I'm always going to be in a position where I'm going to take that call and have that coffee, because that's ultimately what's important.
What is it, David.Bowman@ASM?
Right. We'll get the contact information out there. Yeah. But no, that's something that I jokingly say to people. I check my CalPERS every other month to see when the earliest I can retire. And so, the reality is that I'm not going to be there forever. None of us are, right? So how are we creating the next generation of legislative staff, in leadership roles, to be able to do, sometimes achieve what they want to achieve in the building? And so I feel like that's something that we don't, have as much of nowadays. And my hope with the small platform that I have, and I know other staffers in the building, the hope is to bring that back, to bring that back and really create that, that dynamic where, if something happens, I need someone to talk to, need advice, I can call David, I can call this one, that one, whoever. Mentor, I mean, I would not be, but not for mentors and incredible leaders throughout my career, I would not have been able to sustain a 15-year career in the legislature, but not for members and mentorship and just great relationships with people that have really helped me to grow as a person, as a professional. And so it's incumbent upon me to give that back to anyone that seeks it, and any opportunities I have to give it back. So
no, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, David, thanks so much for joining us. Always great to kind of hear and catch up. And, for our listeners who kind of want a little more knowledge on what reading clerks do, please check out part 1 of David's podcast from last year. You get a really intricacies of what the reading clerk does, and kind of a lot more of David's background. But thanks for coming in and checking up. Always great to hear from you. And, your preparation and, fire for the job is awesome.
Oh, yeah. No, and thank you for having me. This is always a treat and a great opportunity to, I think, your platform just in general, right? The conversations that you have are important conversations, and I feel honored to be a part of the discussion. And again, on the 1 year official from last year to this year, I just really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, no worries.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, thanks, David.
Cool.
We'll catch you later.
Right,
Thanks.
yeah.